Alfonso Cahero, A Journey into Finance History, Chapter 44, Decolonization and Economic Independence Movements, Mid-20th Century. In the mid-20th century, the world was at a crossroads. The winds of change were sweeping across continents, stirring up a fervent desire for independence among colonized nations. The once mighty empires of Europe were beginning to crumble under the weight of their own imperial ambitions. In far-flung corners of the globe, from Africa to Asia to the Caribbean, people were rising up against the yoke of colonial rule. The seeds of discontent had been sown long ago, nurtured by centuries of exploitation, oppression, and injustice. In India, the jewel in the British crown, Mahatma Gandhi led a non-violent struggle for independence that captured the imagination of millions around the world. His message of peace, tolerance, and self-reliance struck a chord with people everywhere who yearned to be free from foreign domination. But India was just the beginning. In Africa, the struggle against colonialism took on a different hue. From Ghana to Kenya to South Africa, brave men and women took up arms against their oppressors, determined to secure their freedom by any means necessary. As the flames of independence spread across the globe, the colonial powers found themselves on the defensive. No longer able to ignore the voices of the oppressed, they were forced to confront the reality of a world that was changing rapidly beneath their feet. In 1945, the end of World War II brought with it a newfound sense of urgency to the decolonization movement. The victorious Allied powers, led by the United States and the Soviet Union, called for an end to colonialism and the establishment of a new world order based on freedom, equality, and self-determination. But the road to independence would not be easy. The colonial powers, reluctant to relinquish their grip on power, fought tooth and nail to maintain their dominance. They deployed their vast resources and formidable military might to crush dissent and quell rebellion wherever it reared its head. Yet, despite their best efforts, the tide of history was against them. The writing was on the wall. The age of empires was coming to an end, and a new era of self-rule and economic independence was dawning. In the midst of this tumultuous period, a chorus of voices rose up to demand justice, equality, and freedom for all. From leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, to Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, to Nelson Mandela in South Africa, the call for independence grew louder and more insistent with each passing day. These were not just political leaders. They were visionaries, dreamers, and revolutionaries who dared to imagine a world where all people were treated as equals, regardless of race, creed, or color. They inspired ordinary men and women to rise up and join the struggle for liberation, to fight for a future where dignity and respect were not just empty words, but lived realities. But the fight for freedom was not without its sacrifices. Many paid the ultimate price for their beliefs, sacrificing their lives on the altar of liberty. Yet their sacrifices were not in vain, for they paved the way for future generations to inherit a world where freedom was no longer a distant dream, but a tangible reality. One of the most powerful weapons in the arsenal of the decolonization movement was the power of unity. Despite their differences in language, culture, and ideology, colonized peoples around the world came together to stand as one against their common oppressors. In conferences and congresses held in far-flung corners of the globe, they forged alliances and built solidarity networks that transcended borders and boundaries. They shared their experiences, exchanged ideas, and pledged to support each other in their struggle for freedom and justice. This spirit of unity was perhaps best exemplified by the Bandung Conference of 1955, where leaders from Asia and Africa came together to assert their right to self-determination and economic independence. Despite the challenges they faced, they remained steadfast in their belief that a better world was possible and that together they could achieve it. But independence was not just about throwing off the yoke of colonial rule. It was also about achieving economic independence and building a future free from the shackles of poverty and underdevelopment. For many newly independent nations, this was a daunting challenge. Stripped of their natural resources, exploited for centuries by their colonial masters, these nations faced an uphill battle to build economies that were sustainable, resilient, and self-sufficient. They had to contend with a legacy of inequality and injustice that had left them on the margins of the global economy. Yet, despite these obstacles, they refused to be daunted. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work, laying the foundations for a new era of prosperity and progress. They invested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, laying the groundwork for future generations to thrive and flourish. But the legacy of colonialism was not so easily erased. For many newly independent nations, the scars of the past ran deep, casting a long shadow over their efforts to build a better future. They grappled with the legacy of inequality, corruption, and division that had been left behind by their colonial masters. In countries like South Africa, the legacy of apartheid cast a dark shadow over the promise of independence, dividing communities along racial lines and perpetuating a system of inequality and injustice that was hard to shake off. In others, like India and Pakistan, the partition of the subcontinent left behind a legacy of bitterness and division that would take decades to overcome. Yet, despite these challenges, the people of these nations refused to be defined by their past. They looked to the future with hope and optimism, determined to build a world where all people were treated as equals, regardless of race, creed, or color. For many colonized peoples, the struggle for independence was not just a political or economic struggle. It was a struggle for self-determination, for the right to chart their own course and determine their own destiny. It was a battle for the soul of their nation, a fight to reclaim their identity and assert their dignity in the face of centuries of oppression. In places like Algeria and Vietnam, the struggle for self-determination took on a particularly fierce and bloody character, as brave men and women took up arms against their colonial masters in a bid to secure their freedom. They fought with courage and determination, refusing to bow down to their oppressors, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Their sacrifices were not in vain. In 1960, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, affirming the right of all peoples to self-determination and independence. It was a historic moment, a victory for justice and equality, and a testament to the power of the human spirit. For many newly independent nations, the road to independence was a long and arduous one, marked by trials and tribulations, setbacks, and struggles. Yet, despite the challenges they faced, they remained steadfast in their belief that a better future was possible and that together they could achieve it. In countries like Ghana and Nigeria, leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Nnamdi Azikiwe led their people to freedom, guiding them through the turbulent waters of independence with courage and conviction. They faced down opposition from their former colonial masters and navigated the treacherous waters of post-colonial politics with skill and determination. But the journey was far from over. In the years that followed independence, these nations faced a host of new challenges, from economic instability to political unrest to social upheaval. Yet, despite the obstacles they faced, they remained resolute in their determination to build a better future for themselves and their children. For many newly independent nations, the struggle for independence was just the beginning of a much longer journey towards building a better future for themselves and their children. They faced a host of new challenges, from economic instability to political unrest to social upheaval. But they refused to be daunted. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work, laying the foundations for a new era of prosperity and progress. They invested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, laying the groundwork for future generations to thrive and flourish. In countries like India and China, leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Mao Zedong embarked on ambitious programs of economic development, laying the groundwork for their countries to emerge as global economic powerhouses in the decades that followed. They invested in heavy industry, infrastructure, and education, laying the foundation for future growth and prosperity. But the struggle for independence was far from over. In many parts of the world, the fight for freedom continued unabated, as brave men and women took up arms against their oppressors in a bid to secure their rights and liberties. In countries like Angola and Mozambique, guerrilla fighters waged a bitter and bloody struggle against their colonial masters, determined to drive them from their lands and reclaim their sovereignty. They fought with courage and determination, refusing to be cowed by the might of their oppressors. Their sacrifices were not in vain. In 1975, Angola and Mozambique finally won their independence, ushering in a new era of hope and optimism for their people. It was a victory for justice and equality, and a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of obstacles.